Imagine a corporate spy, right? Just walking right past your company's state-of-the-art firewall, maybe giving a friendly wave to your IT security team, walking out the back door, and legally carrying your most guarded secrets away in a garbage bag.
I mean, no hacking required whatsoever. No sophisticated syndicates writing malicious code in some dark room.
Exactly. All it takes is, well, a pair of gloves, a willingness to dig through the trash, and the knowledge that once your garbage hits the curb, dumpster diving is completely legal in most jurisdictions.
It really is. And information thieves, they drain over $100 billion a year from the economy. And the biggest vulnerability, it isn't a software bug. It's literally the physical trash.
Right. And today's deep dive is taking us into a world that operates entirely in the background, but is surprisingly high stakes, intensely regulated, and just technologically fascinating.
We spend billions fortifying our networks, encrypting databases, training employees to spot phishing emails. But the current era of information security is entirely focused on protecting data while it is in use.
Yeah, but the physical life cycle of data has this massive blind spot at the very end of the line. And that's our mission for you today. We want you to understand the actual physics and legalities of data destruction.
Right, because destroying information correctly when it reaches obsolescence is where the most catastrophic, preventable failures actually occur.
And we are using materials and research from Neighborhood Parcel, which is a Boston area secure shredding and media destruction service. We all know that simply, tossing a tax return in the bin or dragging a file to the desktop trash can isn't secure.
Oh, not at all.
But we are going to look at the hidden industrial mechanics of how data is truly permanently erased across every medium, and why the standard methods we think are protecting us are actually massive liabilities.
To really understand the modern threat landscape, we have to look at the foundational medium of business. Even in a heavily digitized world, the average office worker still generates roughly 10,000 sheets of paper a year.
10,000! That is just an insane amount of paper for one person.
It is. And the data shows that over 60% of data breaches involving paper records, they don't happen because someone picked the lock on a filing cabinet. They happen during improper disposal.
Wow, over 60%. And when you look at the sources, the healthcare sector is a massive target here, right? It accounts for nearly 18% of all document shredding revenue.
Which makes total sense when you think about it.
Yeah, it really does. You are dealing with protected health information, or PHI, medical charts, insurance claim forms, prescription records.
Even something as seemingly benign as an appointment card is a puzzle piece. When information thieves collect enough of those discarded pieces, they can synthesize a highly credible, complete identity.
That is terrifying.
And the legal framework surrounding those puzzle pieces is completely unforgiving. Laws like EIA at the federal level or strict state regulations like the Massachusetts Privacy Law, 201 CMR 17.000, they treat improper disposal as a severe negligence issue.
I read that a single improperly discarded document can trigger a $5,000 fine per incident.
Per incident, yes. And for systemic failures, EPA penalties can scale up to $1.9 million annually.
Okay, let's unpack this, because knowing those stakes, the fact that businesses still rely on basic office strip-cut shredders is just baffling to me.
It really is a false economy.
Right. We all know what those machines do. They just slice the paper into a few dozen vertical ribbons. It's like trying to mow an 18-hole golf course with a pair of nail clippers. It's inefficient, it jams constantly, and ultimately it just doesn't get the job done.
That's a great way to put it. Anyone with enough patience, a flat surface, and a roll of Scotch tape can literally reconstruct a social security number or a client list in an afternoon.
Yeah, and beyond the physical vulnerability of the strip cut method, there is a massive procedural flaw with in-house shredding. I mean, businesses waste up to 30% more time managing this manually rather than just outsourcing it.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that the underlying concept isn't just about the physical cutting of the paper. It is about liability transfer through a verifiable chain of custody.
Chain of custody, that's the key term.
Right. If you shred the documents yourself and throw the ribbons in the dumpster, and somehow a piece of sensitive data still leaks, you have absolutely no way to prove to an auditor that you did the right thing. Professional destruction is a highly regulated logistical process.
And the industry benchmark for this is NAA AAA certification, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
NAA stands for the National Association for Information Destruction. When a facility holds that AAA certification, it means they are subject to unannounced audits. Their employees undergo rigorous, ongoing background checks, and their destruction particle sizes meet strict legal standards.
So you aren't just paying a company to cut up paper. You are paying for a secure, locked console to be placed in your office.
Right, and you are paying for a uniformed, vetted employee to transport that console in a GPS-tracked vehicle.
And ultimately, you are paying for the certificate of destruction, because that notarized piece of paper is your shield. If a breach occurs elsewhere or an auditor comes knocking, you have legal proof that the life cycle of your data was terminated compliantly.
And the mechanical destruction happening at those professional facilities operates on a scale that is difficult to conceptualize. An industrial shredding plant processes over 100,000 pounds of paper a day.
100,000 pounds.
Yes, which equates to roughly 40 million standard sheets. They do not use strip-cut blades. They use industrial cross-cut or pierce and tear systems that grab the paper and essentially chew it into randomized confetti-like particulate.
So the physical fibers of the paper are obliterated to the point where reconstruction is just mathematically impossible.
Exactly, it's permanent.
The paper trail is a massive logistical challenge because of the sheer volume. But paper is, well, it's easy to physically destroy. The terrifying part is when sensitive data is baked into physical materials that an industrial paper shredder can't touch.
Ah, right. You're talking about medical imaging.
Yes, I'm talking about the massive hidden backlog of analog medical imaging, X-rays. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Medical imaging represents one of the most dangerous, invisible liabilities in the healthcare sector. Current estimates suggest there are 50 million pounds of legacy X-ray film archived in healthcare facilities and storage units across the U.S.
Wait, 50 million pounds? That math feels completely off to me. Didn't most regional hospitals and even local dental offices switch entirely to digital imaging systems well over a decade ago?
Or most of them did, yes.
So where is all this physical analog film actually coming from today? If a dental office switched to digital a decade ago, are you telling me they likely still have boxes of hazardous, privacy-violating silver sitting in a back closet right now?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it comes from the friction of technological transitions and strict retention laws. Medical records must legally be kept for specific durations, often 7 years or more for adults, and sometimes decades for pediatric records.
Oh, right, so they can't just toss them.
Exactly. When a clinic transitioned to digital in, say, 2015, they couldn't just throw away their analog archives. They boxed them up, moved them to off-site storage or a back closet, and largely forgot about them. Retiring physicians passed their archives to storage facilities.
It's just sitting there.
Yes. The highest risk of data exposure rarely comes from a company's daily operations. The danger lives in these messy transitional blind spots where obsolete media is abandoned but not compliantly destroyed.
And disposing of an X-ray is a unique nightmare. You can't separate the data from the medium. The patient's internal anatomy, their name, their medical history, it is permanently burned into the film.
And the mechanics of analog X-rays rely on silver halide chemistry. The film is coated with a gelatin emulsion containing silver halide crystals. When exposed to radiation, those crystals undergo a chemical change.
And they eventually become the microscopic grains of metallic silver that form the visible image.
Right, because the data is literally made of heavy metals. Massachusetts law and many other jurisdictions classify discarded X-rays as potentially hazardous waste.
Wow. So you have a severe HIPAA privacy violation on one hand, and a toxic environmental violation on the other. You can't burn them because of the toxic fumes, and you can't throw them in a landfill because the silver will leach into the groundwater.
Exactly. It's a dual threat.
So how do these secure destruction facilities actually neutralize 50 million pounds of hazardous medical secrets?
It requires a highly specialized two-phase industrial process. The first step is mechanical shredding, similar to paper, but utilizing heavier-duty blades to physically fracture the plastic sheets, rendering the anatomical images and printed text completely unrecognizable.
Okay, but the shredded plastic still contains the heavy metals, right?
Yes, so the second phase is a chemical extraction process. The shredded film is subjected to an enzymatic or chemical wash that dissolves the emulsion layer, separating the silver from the PD plastic base.
That is wild.
Reputable destruction providers can actually extract 4 to 8 ounces of pure silver for every 100 pounds of film processed.
They're literally mining precious metals out of old medical records. That is incredible. And that silver is then smelted, purified, and fed directly back into a circular economy for use in electronics and jewelry, while the clean plastic is recycled.
It's a very elegant solution. The physical nature of X-rays forces us to confront the reality of the storage medium. You cannot ignore a warehouse full of silver-laced plastic. But this brings us to the most dangerous blind spot of all. Digital media.
Because digital technology creates a powerful illusion.
Yes, it tricks us into believing we can easily separate the information from the physical object that holds it.
We really need to shatter the myth of the delete button for good. Most of us listening already know that dragging a file to the desktop trash can doesn't erase it.
Right, it doesn't do anything to the data itself.
To put the actual mechanism in perspective, deleting a file or even doing a basic format of a hard drive is exactly like ripping the table of contents out of a massive book.
That's a perfect analogy.
The chapters, the actual ones and zeros making up your tax returns and passwords, are still perfectly intact and readable to anyone who picks up the book and flips through the pages. The computer simply deletes the file pointer and marks that space as available to be written over.
Right.
But until new data physically overwrites those specific sectors, the old secrets are just sitting there. To actually protect yourself, you have to throw the entire book into an industrial blender.
And this raises an important question, because the failure to understand that file pointer mechanism has massive consequences. When researchers purchase and test discarded consumer hard drives from secondary markets or recycling centers, they consistently find that 40% of them still contain highly sensitive, easily recoverable data.
40%.
Yes, 40% of the time, users believe they have wiped a drive, and they are completely wrong.
I was looking at the physical destruction specs in the neighborhood parcel materials. Their industrial media shredders are literally chewing up metal hard disk drives into 2-inch fragments in under 2 seconds.
It's very fast.
They can process thousands of drives an hour. But I also saw them outline a process called dejossing. If you have a machine that can pulverize a metal brick in 2 seconds, why do you need magnets?
Well, professional destruction often utilizes a defense-in-depth approach. Traditional hard disk drives, or HDDs, store data magnetically on spinning metal platters.
Right, the old school clicking drives.
Exactly. Degaussing subjects that drive to an incredibly powerful magnetic field, often upwards of 10,000 Gauss. This pulse completely randomizes the magnetic domains on the platters at the subatomic level.
So it's not just deleting files.
No, it destroys the magnetic tracks and sectors themselves, rendering the drive completely dead and the data mathematically unrecoverable. For highly classified government or corporate data, standard protocol is to degauss the drive to scramble the data, and then physically shred the drive so the platters can never be spun again.
But the magnetic approach has a massive, glaring vulnerability when we talk about modern hardware, doesn't it?
A catastrophic vulnerability. If a destruction vendor doesn't understand the physics of modern storage. We were talking about solid-state drives, or SSDs. The sources note that SSDs now make up over 60% of new storage deployments in healthcare and enterprise environments.
Yeah, they are the standard in modern laptops, tablets, and servers. And SSDs don't use spinning magnetic platters at all. They use NAND flash memory.
Precisely. Flash memory stores data by trapping microscopic electrical charges, electrons, inside isolated floating gate transistors on a silicon chip.
So there's no magnetism involved.
None. Because they rely on trapped electrons rather than magnetic fields to hold data, degaussing an SSD accomplishes absolutely nothing.
Wow.
You can subject a modern solid-state drive to the strongest magnetic field on Earth, and the trapped electrons in those gates will remain perfectly undisturbed.
So if a company sends a batch of modern laptops to a legacy destruction facility that only uses degaussers, their data remains entirely exposed.
Completely exposed. An SSD must be physically pulverized into fragments small enough to guarantee that the actual silicon memory chips are shattered.
It's terrifying how a slight shift in storage physics completely invalidates an entire security protocol. But as much as we worry about our laptops and servers, the sources highlighted a peripheral device that represents the ultimate enterprise Trojan horse, the office photocopier.
Oh, the copier hard drive is a perfect example of how our focus on primary computing devices blinds us to peripheral risks.
We all know that modern commercial photocopiers are essentially high-powered computers on your network. They have their own internal hard drives.
Yes, they do.
But what is truly unsettling is the procedural failure around them. These machines spool and store an image of every single document they process.
Every single one.
Every confidential legal contract, every HR dispute, every unredacted financial audit you've ever placed on the glass of a leased office copia is saved on that internal drive. And the sources point out that one of the most common preventable data breaches happens when a business's lease on that copier ends.
They just roll it out the door.
Exactly. They put it on a truck and send it back to the vendor without ever pulling the hard drive.
It forces a critical distinction between assumed vendor compliance and the legal standard of destruction. Under regulations like the HIPAA security rule, Electronic protected health information must be rendered permanently unreadable and indecipherable.
Right.
Simply assuming a leasing company will perform a DoD-level wipe on a return copier does not meet that legal standard of care. True compliance requires the organization to proactively remove the hard drive from the copier before it leaves the building and subject it to that verifiable chain of custody ending in physical shredding and a certificate of destruction.
So what does this all mean? We've mapped out a landscape with a lot of hidden landmines. We've got paper trails leading to identity theft because of cheap office shredders. We have 50 million pounds of toxic silver-laced X-rays sitting in forgotten storage closets.
And we have zombie data living on old solid-state drives and leased copiers because people misunderstand the physics of digital storage.
Exactly. The sheer scale of destruction required to secure all of this sounds like an environmental nightmare. But the underlying mechanics of this industry actually drive a massive ecological benefit.
They do. The secure document destruction market is a massive logistical engine, valued globally at $3.15 billion as of 2024. But the scale of that infrastructure is exactly what makes the environmental upside possible.
And despite the industrial scale, it remains incredibly accessible. The transparency in the pricing from these local Boston sources was genuinely surprising to me.
How so?
Well, you would assume NAA, AAA certified enterprise-level security would cost a fortune or require massive corporate contracts. But they offer standard drop-off paper shredding starting at just 99 cents a pound for everyday consumers.
That is very affordable.
Yeah. No minimums, no recurring contracts. You literally walk in with a cardboard box of old tax returns from your garage, and for less than the cost of a cup of coffee, your personal history is subjected to the exact same legal standard of destruction as a major hospital network.
And the culmination of that secure process is total material reclamation. When documents are shredded at these professional facilities, 100% of that pulverized paper particulate is baled and integrated directly back into the recycling supply chain.
So it's not going to a landfill?
No, it's typically sent straight to paper mills to be pulped into new consumer products.
The numbers on the environmental efficiency of that reclamation blew my mind. For every single ton of paper processed and recycled through these secure channels, we save 7,000 gallons of water.
Wow.
We save between 17 and 31 mature trees. We save 4,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. And we prevent 60 pounds of airborne pollutants from entering the atmosphere.
It profoundly changes how an organization or an individual should view the concept of information disposal. Information security isn't just a digital problem confined to a firewall or an IT department.
Right.
It's a physical responsibility and ultimately an environmental responsibility. The professional shredding and media destruction industry represents the final, essential stage of the data lifecycle.
It takes what is traditionally a boring, stressful administrative chore, cleaning out your filing cabinets, or finally getting rid of that drawer full of old hard drives, and transforms it into a literal act of environmentalism.
It really does.
You are simultaneously bulletproofing your identity from thieves while actively saving forests and thousands of gallons of water.
Whether it's chemically extracting silver from legacy X-rays to reuse in manufacturing, separating the rare earth metals from shredded hard drives, or baling paper confetti for the mills, secure destruction ensures that while the sensitive data is permanently eradicated, the physical resources are reclaimed and kept out of landfills.
Let's bring this all together. We started by looking at why the cheap office shredder fails, both mechanically and legally, leaving you exposed without a chain of custody. We dug into the molecular chemistry of analog X-rays, discovering how heavy metals create a dual threat of privacy loss and environmental contamination. We confronted the physics of digital storage, exploring why magnets can wipe a spinning hard drive but do absolutely nothing to the trapped electrons in a solid-state drive.
And finally, we saw how industrial destruction is actually the engine driving mass recycling.
This is still a wild journey.
It is a vast, rigorously audited infrastructure operating in the background of our daily lives, ensuring that obsolete information doesn't compromise our future.
So whether you are a clinic manager navigating strict PHI regulations and hardware leases, or you are just someone staring at an old, slow laptop you want to throw out, you are an active participant in this data lifecycle. What stands out to you? Where are the blind spots in your own home or office?
The verifiable chain of custody always begins with the end user making the conscious decision to bypass the convenience of the trash can.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We talked about how 40% of discarded hard drives still hold highly sensitive, recoverable data when they are thrown away.
Yeah, that 40% number is hard to shake.
It is. Now, think about the sheer volume of perfectly intact corporate secrets, entire medical histories, and complete personal identities currently buried deep beneath the dirt in your local landfill. They are just sitting there in the dark, waiting for their plastic and metal casings to slowly degrade. We talk endlessly about the clouds as if our data is ethereal and invisible. But the physical devices holding the blueprints of our lives are very real, and their memories are very permanent until we make the proactive choice to mathematically and mechanically destroy them. So the next time you take the trash out to the curb, ask yourself what you're really throwing away.